Yeah. Good. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this event on co-creational media. I'm very conscious that this is 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. It's the last day of the English language part of the International Journalism Festival this year. I think those of us who've been here for the last 3 or 4 days are probably, like me, tired but inspired. And we have one more session for you before we can all go and relax this evening. Before we do, though, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the organisers. We have the technicians with us and all the volunteers and the team who make this possible behind the scenes. And they don't really get much public acknowledgement or praise. So could we all just give a real round of applause? Because there is a huge amount of work that goes in behind the scenes to making this festival possible. I'm Jonathan Heawood. I run an organisation called the Public Interest News Foundation in the UK, and we have been working for the last few years with a group of philosophers. And that may sound a bit strange. Why would we sit down and waste time talking to philosophers when the world is on fire and we have some immediate challenges to fix? But we think some of the ways in which the world is on fire are kind of philosophical. They're about ideas, they're about concepts, they're about how we think about things like journalism and democracy. And actually, philosophers have a surprising amount of answers as well as questions. So I've been working with my colleague Fabienne Peter from the University of Warwick in the UK, and Jay Howard from the University of Oxford, and our other colleague Rowan Croft from the University of Stirling, who's not here. And we've been asking ourselves a really simple question: what is the role of the news media in democracy? We thought that was a nice, easy one to spend time worrying about. And what we began to feel as we tried to answer that very simple question was that it was like we were being forced to choose between two unsatisfactory alternatives. It was as if the only two answers to that question were either the role of the news media is to fulfill the traditional 20th century model of professional journalism. Think about organisations like the New York Times or the BBC, where a small group of quite elite journalists with a very particular kind of education, often from a very narrow group of backgrounds, they sit in these ivory towers and they decide what's true, and they pump out information to the rest of the world, and everybody else is just a passive audience for that. That's one model. It has strengths. There's a kind of objectivity to that model of journalism. Sometimes it helps to establish the truth, but it's really not very good at involving the public and really legitimately building a democratic conversation. And then for the last 10 or 15 years, we've had an equal and opposite model of social media. And social media is also full of strengths and weaknesses. It's good at involving the public. For the first time, in theory, you have an internet connection, you can join this global conversation. But as we know in practice, what has happened, maybe this is just because of the people who own the platforms and the incentives that they've built into those platforms. Maybe it's something more fundamental about social media. We don't know at the moment. But the reality is that what happens on social media is you do discover some new, exciting, important truths and insights, but you also see a lot of bullshit and lies and propaganda. And often it's the bullshit that seems to rise to the top. And it's the important and original and fact-based insights which seem to sink. So social media, great at participation, not so great at truth. Professional media, quite good at truth, not good at participation. Why do we have to choose? Are these really the only two alternatives? Or is there not a third way, a model of media that could have the best of both? So we asked ourselves that as a really hypothetical question. We called it co-creational media. We said, what if there was a model of media that was genuinely committed to what philosophers call epistemic value, in other words, the values of truth, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and genuinely committed to public participation, particularly for those groups who are most excluded from more traditional professional forms of media. And then we really quickly realized this is not just a hypothetical, abstract question, because there are people in the UK, in Brazil, in the United States, and around the world who are actually exploring this model of co-creational media, and in very different ways, are pushing into that third space, that emerging space. So we've been working with some of them in the UK for the last few years to really understand what that looks and feels like, what are the advantages of that approach, but also what are the costs and challenges and tensions. So here we are. We're going to talk a little bit on the panel about what this looks and feels like, what works, what's difficult. I'm really keen to open up the conversation. I know, looking around, we have some real experts in the room, so let's try and make this as co-creational as possible and have a real conversation. So we'll just set the scene on the panel and then we'll open up for discussion. I'm joined by Eliz Mizon from the Bristol Cable in the UK, by Natalia Viana from Agencia Publica in Brazil, and behind me by Simon Galperin, who looms large above us from the Jersey Bee in the US. And I'm sorry, some of you may have been looking forward to see Darryl Holliday, who was originally scheduled to be on this panel. He had to pull out at very short notice, but we were delighted that Simon was able to jump in and talk about his amazing work in New Jersey. So can I just begin with a really simple question? Maybe Eliz, you could begin. So I've just given a really abstract overview. What the hell am I talking about? Co-creational media. What does it actually look, feel, taste, and smell like for you in Bristol?
I don't think I'll go as far as to what it smells like, but I'll give it hopefully a good overview. So I, for the last 3 years, have worked at the Bristol Cable, which is a local cooperatively owned newspaper and website and podcasts, etc. We have 2,500 paying members, and every one of those members owns the cable equally. So no matter how much you pay, you can pay as little as £1 a month. Hopefully you will pay a lot more than that, and a lot of people do pay a lot more than that. Everybody who pays has an equal vote, one member, one vote, no matter how much you pay. And we have an AGM every year, as most co-ops do, where we make big decisions. We give people who come along context for one or two big decisions that we want to make. It might be something that the staff team has been deliberating on for a while, or it might just be something that, you know, we think this is a good opportunity to get the members involved. Let's ask them the question. And we also have an inbuilt membership platform also, which we can use throughout the year while we don't have an AGM, to ask people questions such as, we're writing a piece about the bus service in Bristol. What's been your experience of using the buses, good or bad? And we might then go back to those people and use what they've told us in our reporting. So that's the way in which the Bristol Cable is co-creational.
Thank you very much, Eliz. Natalia, Agencia Publica, a world away from Bristol. What's your approach?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So Agencia Publica is an investigative journalism agency in Brazil. It's the largest nonprofit media in Latin America. But because we do investigations, you know, investigative journalists tend to be very secretive about what they're investigating. They don't want, you know, to let people know that they're being investigated. So we've really thought, how can we involve people? How can get knowledge from people? So we've done this in a variety of ways in 14 years that we've existed. I'm going to give 2 examples. The first one is an example with a very specific focus. During the 2016 Olympics in Rio, there were lots of people who were evicted from their homes, like really lots, like 50,000. People were evicted from their homes to give way for the works for stadiums, etc. And we decided we wanted to find a sample, so we wanted to find 100 families who had been evicted. And one of the things that we did is we went to the place where they used to live, and then we tried to find these people. So we started like a cooperative thing where people would we sent out messages on WhatsApp, and people would contact people would contact people, and then we would finally reach out these people who were evicted. We eventually, after we also we needed people who could do the legwork, so we partnered up with a university. We got 50 students to go to these places where they were living, interview them. We managed to get over 3 months to interview 100 families. And what we did is each one of them told their stories on video. So our final product was actually a database of stories told in first person, translated to English, that any journalist who would cover the Olympics in Rio could use. So actually many other stories in different parts of the world use the same, database of, just people telling their own stories. So this is a story in which we had a specific focus, what is our goal? And then during the pandemic, we did a reverse thing. We were all stuck home. Brazil is very big, 210 million people, huge area. And we wanted to understand what was going wrong, what was weird that was happening in Brazil. So we started a forum online and reached out to social leaders in different parts of Brazil to spread the link. We basically asked, are you seeing something that shouldn't be happening in your country regarding COVID? What can you tell us that we should investigate? And after we put this out, we received lots of different, people denouncing things, but we found a pattern which was in many municipalities all over Brazil. The municipal states were giving out chloroquine as a medicine. And the reason they were doing this is Brazilians really believe in medicines, right? They're a little bit like Americans. And, science had proved that this has no effect, but the mayors wanted to be elected for the election that was going to happen that year. So this was actually helping their popularity because they were actually doing something. So for the first time in the entire Brazilian media, we learned that the Brazilian health system, which is a public health system, was distributing chloroquine for free as a medicine for COVID. And we did a huge story. We went to travel around the country. We called it the country of the chloroquine. And this was a story that we broke only 6 months later. Mainstream media managed to understand that this was going on. So that's a story that shows how also co-creating, you can find stories that are out there, but you're not seeing.
It's amazing. So already we're hearing about two really different models. We've got Bristol, where you've got public ownership and agenda setting of the media. You've got your work in Brazil, where you've got almost journalists acting as facilitators for a story and then getting out of the way. And in the case of the evictions, letting those people with lived experience tell their own story, and that's amplified around the world. Simon, if I can jump up the Atlantic seaboard to New Jersey, how does it look from where you are?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on my birthday. So this is a wonderful way to just hold space. I'm not in New Jersey today. I'm in upstate New York, so it's a little snowy outside. So it's a nice little present for me. But I am the executive editor of the Jersey Bee, founder of the Jersey Bee. The co-creation is in our mission statement. We work with the people we serve to meet information needs, increase civic participation, and improve quality of life in our community. We start with people's information needs. What do people want to know, and to improve their quality of life and build civic power. And then the different ways we do that is in all of our products and programs and services. So I'm just going to lightly touch on a couple of them. To help answer that question. So we produce 12 daily newsletters, one for each town and city we serve in our population, in our sort of core service area in East Essex County, New Jersey, which for folks who may be familiar enough with the area, it's near Newark, the city of Newark, which is near the city of New York in New Jersey on the eastern seaboard. So we cover half of a county there. It's one of the most densely populated urban counties in the state. It's also one of the most highly segregated counties in the country. And what that means is that the districts in the cities and the cities themselves are often have been historically redlined, meaning that Black people weren't allowed to buy homes in some places, Jewish people weren't allowed to buy homes in some places. So as a result, we're dealing with an environment across these 12 cities that's very complex. So what we do is we try to understand people's information needs in these places to try to build a sense of shared community and solidarity and a shared sense of identity so we can begin solving some of the problems we have. So the way we do that is we use these 12 daily newsletters. We listen to our community through feeds and amplify useful news and information. We use the newsletter to canvas and build audience that we enroll in our programs through surveys, trainings, and our virtual reference desk. That's where people can always submit a question to us, and we'll do our best to see if we can answer it, or if not, we add it to our editorial queue. Then we produce reporting in response to people's needs. Our civic media core is our community training program. That's where we're teaching those same folks journalism and media skills to then produce content and resources with us. I also want to finally highlight our relationship with the organizations in our coverage area that may be distinct in this, and relevant to the subject as well. So because we focus on service journalism, it allows us to think of them more as partners than just sources. Some of them, right? So what that lets us do is be a part of public health coalitions and social justice coalitions and other different groups that are actively doing stuff out in the world. And partnering with them allows us to host events, provide our services, produce content and resources. So we think of ourselves from sort of start to finish as a co-creational, participatory local media organization.
Thank you, Simon. I think that's so interesting. I think it immediately gets to one of the big issues, which I think we'll come back to in the discussion, which is that for someone who is born and bred within the traditional ivory tower model of journalism, some of what you've been describing is quite problematic. If they've been trained in a certain way to be or to believe that they are disinterested, neutral, detached, almost inhuman, and simply an information machine, then the idea that they work in partnership with citizens and civil society organisations to achieve change is really quite a troubling idea. So let's come back to that, because I think that's a great idea, and we have to acknowledge it's just a different mode of journalism, which is equally valuable but has different ways of working. But Eliz, if I can just come back to the cable. So you described kind of what you do, but I guess it's useful to understand why. What was the original vision behind the cable, and what do you think the benefits are of actually allowing all these awful people in off the streets to tell you what to do as journalists?
A little bit of sort of context behind it. So the cable started in 2014. In 2012, there was the Leveson inquiry, which was the result of the phone hacking scandal, a government inquiry into really what happened at the time. It was supposedly only the news of the world. Of course, we knew then at the time that that wasn't true, and we definitely know now that that wasn't true. But numerous high-profile national newspapers had been breaking the law in a number of ways, not least hacking into people's phones. So after the Leveson inquiry was concluded in 2012, there were some recommendations, not that many of them were really taken up or made any sort of huge difference. And so that was the context in which the cable came into being. And the benefit, I think, of doing that was that immediately when you have a newspaper which, you know, and this at the time was actually quite revolutionary, like less so now that I think the digital subscriber model, even if people aren't owners of the paper, the digital subscriber model now is, you know, ubiquitous. At the time, even just 10 years ago, it really wasn't. It was still quite a new thing. But add to that the fact that everybody who is a member of the cable also owns the cable and gets to have a say on the cable's direction, not necessarily the day-to-day decisions, but the direction of the cable, the tone of the cable, and can give that kind of feedback quite regularly. You know, immediately there is trust there, where there very, very much wasn't in the British media landscape between the public and the British media at the time. Not just as a result of the phone hacking scandal, but, you know, it was very much sort of without any doubt that people had just completely lost faith in journalists as a whole. And so I think that is really the benefit, is that when, you know, the people own the newspaper and can give direct feedback to the people that run that newspaper, immediately you've got a different dynamic. Mm.
Is that something that you really make a virtue of in your marketing and messaging about the cable, that, you know, we are not mainstream media?
Yes, absolutely. And very much that, you know, we encourage feedback, and you know, believe me, we get feedback from the members. They give us what for sometimes, and we really have to welcome that and encourage people to do that. Become a member, you know, pay £1 a month, even if that's all you can give, and you get exactly the same amount of say as everybody else. So I think it's a real encouragement to get involved with us, not just pay us money so that we can produce the lovely newspaper and do the lovely podcasts, but actually come and become a member of our community and be involved in what we're doing.
Brilliant. And Natalia, you know, going out and finding 100 people who have this experience, who are some of the most literally dispossessed people in Brazil, this is really hard work. Why bother?
Why bother? And also, why, not only why, but like, why this number? it was very hard to get figures. This is part of how the government was dealing with the human rights violations around the Olympics. There were no public figures about what was going on. So we wanted to do something that was actually very concrete, that could show the magnitude of what was happening. And we did work out like the fraction that we would need to get to actually be a substantial sample. So it was basically just, research, statistical research. And we did two things with that, like as in terms of conclusion. And we came up with a conclusion that was completely new to me, to us. We had no idea. So one of the things is we heard all of their stories. We heard about, the process in which they were pretty pushed out from their homes with different tactics and strategies of pressure, which was kind of what we expected. But then we traced where they were and where they were taken to. And what we found out is that they were removed from central areas to, peripheral areas, which is what happens. But all of these areas around in the outskirts of town were dominated by militias. So they were basically thrown in the hands of these, militias who were criminal gangs who just rule entire territories, who would then force them to vote for other militias. So this is part, this had a huge political impact, totally unintended, that nobody was reporting on. So why bother? Well, I guess we thought we'd find a big story. We did find a big story.
It's really interesting because this idea that, if you start to involve the public in your journalism, you'll lose objectivity, you'll lose truth, no, you find the deeper truth. Simon, what motivates you and what are the benefits for the Jersey Bee of this approach?
I have to say that at first I'm biased, right? I think that the democratic way to do things is the right way. So I'm coming at it from that perspective. But I think for us, it's unlocking trust, it's unlocking relevance, it's unlocking innovation and impact in ways that we just would not be able to do if we were just taking the traditional approach. For whatever reason, right? The landscape has changed, and this is the way that we can engage people in journalism, especially people who have been historically underserved, especially people who are not having their information needs met, who have significant information and resource gaps that we can directly address in order to then do the rest of, the capital J journalism that could be required. We're going to, we are filing a provisional patent application in the next few months for the system we developed to publish our newsletters and all of our content. And, if that gets approved, that innovation came directly from a listening session we held in 2019, where people said, it's hard for me to just, articles and context and accountability journalism are important, but right now I just can't even navigate the day-to-day existence in this information ecosystem. You can't, what would the New York Times be without its audience? You know what I mean? The idea that audience is not playing a role in our newsrooms already, or that the relationships we have with our sources and the organizations we work with is complex, to Eliz's point, right? Like journalists are violating some of those, traditional ethics already, you know what I mean? I think it's important to question those ethics, who they serve and what people need. And that's the benefit to us, is that we're hitting a note that other people cannot.
It's fantastic. I'm going to open up to questions in a moment, but so what I'm hearing is some of the benefits are trust, deep understanding, knowledge, research, and relevance and legitimacy, and actually speaking to people at a time when we are in conferences like this around the world. News media executives sit around wringing their hands of how can we rebuild trust? How can we rebuild relevance? Well, here you are. Here's part of the solution. Natalia, just in terms of the challenges, though, because I think you said also as an investigative journalist, there are things which you are not necessarily able to share with the wider public whilst an investigation is in process. So do you think there are limits to this model?
In investigative journalism, for sure. And I think we discussed this in the previous conversation, is this an expensive thing to do? It's not expensive at all. It does take a lot of effort. So we in Brazil don't consider time to be money. Time is time, money is money. But so it's human effort. You have to have your heart in it. So it does drag, it's dragging. It's like you have to have your newsroom, you have to have a lot of people. We needed to partner up with a university to go find these people. So you can do this all the time. You have to, to select how many you can do. But also, I think, so I see this as like a special project, not like an ongoing thing that you can do all the time. And that's why we don't do as many of them, but that's why, but because the results are so good, I find it like, I'm very fond of the results.
Are there challenges for you with your model, or is it plain, the people of Bristol are just only too keen to get involved and...
I think some of the people of Bristol are very keen to get involved, but what I will say is I really agree with Natalia about that a lot of it is about time and effort, and I think also a lot of it is about skill. So, for example, I am one person, and let's say, for example, that I am a journalist at the Bristol Cable. If I'm running an AGM, I also then need to be an event manager, and if I'm organising a group of people to give us certain amounts of feedback and maybe convene a small working group with them, then I have to be somebody who's good at managing people and good at small talk and all of that kind of stuff, which I am not. And I think, it's really interesting that one of the things we've said at the Cable several times is that there is a habit of people joining the Cable to do a specific role and then kind of doing a bit of everything. And I think that, just being a journalist or, doing any individual work, you can quite easily get burnt out. But I think that one of the things that leads very, very quickly to burnout is when everybody does a bit of everything and that it all becomes very unclear and you're kind of managing lots and lots of different roles. So one of the things I would say is just the people management side of things gets quite vast quite quickly and sort of quite unwieldy quite quickly, and so there's a lot of time and effort to be spent, but it also requires a lot of different skills which not everyone in a team can always have.
No, and also if you think about the way that journalists are still being educated and trained, it's not to do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like a completely...
And nor should it be necessarily. I think that's also one of the things I would say the Cable could be better at, is having specific people to do specific things. So okay. I'm not necessarily saying that that's something that people need to do in order to do co-creational media.
Okay, interesting. Simon?
Challenges. I think there's a limit to funders' imagination and appetite for advanced theories of change beyond, we produce, a big impactful journalism investigation or viral journalism article. I think the public imagination is also limited, right? I think we're redefining what local news and information means at the local level. We think about ourselves as modeling what a public utility, like a publicly funded local news service, like something that provides civic education ongoing into people's adult lives and for the benefit of the community. So that, holding that, complex vision and then bringing that back down to people and meeting them where they're at, whether they're a funder or a community member, I think is the biggest challenge. And I think what that calls for, sort of echoing, I think, Eliz's point, which is like, it's a different set of skills that journalists don't necessarily have. We think of ourselves as organizers often because it requires a lot of like uncomfortable conversations, communication skills, space holding, we don't often, we don't necessarily know what products and programs are going to look like when we start having conversations in collaboration with people. Yeah, I think those are the things I would say. I think that, for us, we have in our organization two of our core values is shared responsibility and mutual learning. So we operate internally by consensus often. So we are like fully trying to live this thing, and that's hard for organizations to do, especially if you don't have funding support, especially if you don't have the skills, training, or capacity that you need, especially if you don't have the audience yet to drive that revenue. So it's a much more challenging model, I think, to hold at this time. Hopefully not, increasingly less, I think, right? As we're seeing on this panel.
Natalia.
Can I say something? I do agree with you that, maybe you need different people doing different roles, but I have to agree with Jonathan, actually, that it is very exciting for a journalist to be taken out of their ivory tower and be able to perform other activities as well. It's very rewarding for a journalist to be out there talking to people and listening to people. And I think it's not that everybody, and I can see how this can generate stress, but I think it's very good that journalists are more flexible as well and have to perform other tasks involving the public.
I think also for us in our research and working with Eliz and others, some of whom are in this room, the other thing that became really clear to us is it just demands a whole new ethics of care, which is not really built into traditional journalism ethics. So you're working with people sometimes in the long term, and you're working with people who are very vulnerable, and you're encouraging them to tell their stories, and telling their stories may make them more vulnerable. And then you have an ongoing duty of care. And I think one example someone gave to us was that you might even get to a point after 12 months of working with a community or in a group that actually you decide it's not the right thing to tell their stories. You know, whereas the traditional journalist would think, okay, my only job is to persuade these people to give up their secrets, and then I'm done. Yeah. Look, let's get started. I'm seeing people around the room who I think are kind of real experts in this territory. Can you put your hand up if you are in any way already engaged in some kind of co-creational media as a practitioner, a researcher, a funder? So I think there's a whole load of people. And it's not only those people who are allowed to ask questions, you can also ask questions if you don't know what the hell we're talking about. But yeah, hands up who would like to ask questions or make... Oh, fantastic. Okay, I'll take a little group. So I'll start here. Did you want to decide between you, or do you both want to ask a question? Is there a microphone? Both of you. Let's both of you ask a question.
Right, yes. So, yes, Serena and I are with the same organization. It's called the SICK Initiative, and essentially we train citizens to do investigations, and we also work with newsrooms to work with their communities to do joint investigations. So essentially my question is, have you actually done that instead of just co-creation to do co-investigations, and what is your experience, if any, doing that sort of thing? And or maybe using the...
Yeah, no, I can follow. I mean, I have two, well, I guess my first question is the same and directly tied to Bristol Cable, like how much appetite is there for the members to actually be involved in the production of journalism? And then for Natalia, yeah, when we look at a lot of other projects that are, you know, trying to do the same thing as us, and I often find that some of the best ones are in Brazil, Data Labe, for example. And why is that the case? And what kind of barriers do you have in terms of actually, I hate to use this word, but recruiting the citizens and trying to get them on board?
Brilliant. I think there was another question. Was there here? Yes? Sorry to make you run around. The lady in the brown jacket.
Thanks. This has been a great discussion. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about challenges, and you were talking about this sort of duty of care and trust. I worked with Global Voices for a number of years, and we had many successes and also like moments where trust broke, and it was really difficult to repair. We always learned a lot, but I'm kind of curious if you're willing to talk about experiences with that.
Thank you. And was there just one other, the guy in the middle, just to keep you exercising. Just keep your hand up again, so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sebastian, and besides sending a virtual hug to Simon, I wanted to ask Eliz if you can elaborate a bit more about governance on the Bristol Cable, because you mentioned that despite what you pay, you have a say. So how that actually is, how that actually is played on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, or where do you put limits and where you provide avenues for your community to do that from a process perspective? Thank you.
Great. So great questions about how do we actually get citizens involved in investigations? Is there real appetite for people to actually get involved in governance and so on? How do they get involved? And what do we mean about this duty of care, and how do you fix it when things go wrong? I'm really happy anyone to take any of those questions. Do you want to begin, Eliz?
Sure, I can come really specifically, I think, to these questions here. Yours is in my head, so I'm going to go for that first, if that's okay. So the most direct governance that we have from our members is our directors board. So we have an unpaid, non-executive directors board who are a group of the members who are elected by the rest of the membership, or at least the people who want to vote, which is usually sort of roughly 200 people out of the 2,500 members. They are a group of 10 members who we can call upon for advice. And so we interact with them, we meet them every 2 months. And we ask them for advice, they give us advice, and we pretty much always take it. But they are non-executive, so they don't have a say over our editorial decisions month to month, and they don't, hire and fire people. But they will, for example, if they have a specific skill set, sit in on an interview panel when we decide to hire people. And then the staff makes the hiring decision, but they help us with things like that. So that's our most direct. We then have the AGM every year where we give the membership context on which to vote on certain decisions. So again, you might get 50 to 100 people who are members who turn up to the AGM. And then we will say, for example, there's a new big tech grant. Everybody hates big tech, though, so should we go for it? Because we really want the money, but, we can all agree that we hate Facebook or whatever. And actually, weirdly, when we asked them that, they said, yeah, go for it, take the money, you need it. So we ask them big questions like that, I would say once a year. And then I'll draw this into the thing you were saying. We also have our survey system, our membership system that was built by my ex-colleague, Will Franklin, which is a platform where we host our membership database, and within that, it's got an interactive survey system. So, for example, if we're doing, I would say that we co-create more with like features journalism. So just as an example, that I gave you the bus example earlier, we ask people for their experience, and then we might contact those people who responded and say, can we have a bit more information? But usually we'll just be picking quotes out. And so in that way, they've contributed to the journalism. Another thing is recently there's a big cultural events venue that's shutting down. And we've asked people, give us your memories of being there. Are you affected by this? Do you work there? Have you just been there a lot? So we're asking people to contribute in that way. But if we were doing really sensitive investigations into, some sort of tip-off we've been given by a whistleblower or something, we probably wouldn't involve the public in producing that piece of journalism. That would be a deeper investigation that would be done by our journalists. So I think there are certainly situations in which we wouldn't necessarily involve the membership that deeply.
Really interesting. Natalia?
So many questions. I think, again, sorry. I think I'm going to start with why Brazil, because that's a lovely question. It has a lovely answer. Why Brazil? Because Brazil is a huge country. Brazil has 310 million people. It has, most of the Amazons is huge, like a big chunk of South America. It's a country with a lot of inequality and not a lot of money. So the way the Brazilians have had to deal with difficulties is by being inventive. So one of the things that we are seeing, for instance, in the US is like when there's threats of fund cuts, etc. Everybody's so used to having money available that everybody freaks out. If you go to Paraguay, if you go to Brazil, things have just had to exist. So if you look at Data Lab, I know them, they started out of nothing. They were doing volunteer work, for years before they saw any kind of money. And they actually started thinking about, how we're going to make this into a business. This is good and bad as well, of course, because then you have journalists who are not being paid, but it is very, very resilient. So in Brazil, if there is, somebody says, okay, no more grant funding, this is illegal or whatever, we know, not only Brazil, in the entire Latin America, we know that there's going to be resilience. People are doing this because that's what we do. That's what we do in a poor country. We just make, space for community and to try and make things better. So yeah, that's because we do it because we need to do it. That's, I would say, is the answer. Brazil is a very rich country in terms of innovation and new journalism platforms. So now we have an association with over 150 members. It's called AJOR. They're all started by journalists. They're all small, big, different sizes. But our association right now is bigger than the Legacy Media Association in terms of and if you want to learn more about Latin America, there is a study by the Gabo Foundation that mapped out over 1,500 news initiatives that sprouted out in Latin America in the last 5 to 10 years. So there's a new wave of things happening there. So that's hope and happiness. Now, broken trust, sad and despair. I do not have a lot of broken trust stories, very specifically about this co-creational media, but we did once run a story that was bad. It was badly checked. The data absolutely didn't work out. And it was an accusation against the federal government of Dilma Rousseff, and they got really pissed off and they came and called us out. So that was a long time ago. The path we decided to take, everybody was freaking out because, you know, we hate to be wrong. The path we decided to take is back then we wrote a very long piece explaining what is the real data. But in the beginning, we explained we got it wrong, and here's how we got it wrong. The reason we got it wrong is also because there's not a lot of transparency on the numbers, so they're hard to find, but we were pretty honest, and then we gave the right story. And I think that was a good move, because I think this regained trust and was just very transparent to our public.
Thanks, Natalia. Simon, feel free to pick up on any outstanding questions.
Sure, I could just talk to duty of care a little bit. I think that's like a hard thing to navigate depending on the outcome that you're expecting on the end of that. For us, you know, like our curation product, our newsletter product, we think about providing useful news and information. So one thing that includes is considerations for where we distribute certain news items. So community violence does not get distributed outside of the community that is affected. If news or information that we are receiving and considering for amplification, curation, and sharing with our community harms a community, whether it's using sort of certain narratives, phrases, framings, you know, mugshots is the greatest example. Like, we don't report on crime news in that regard, but in the US, it's like a contentious issue that newspapers are still posting people's mugshots when they get arrested and have not been found guilty. So in that vein, we think about, you know, we don't want to harm the communities we're serving. We don't want to exacerbate the tension and fear and anxiety that they feel already consuming, you know, traditional news and information. So we're thinking about ourselves as like, we want to give something that's useful, and we need people to be at a place where they can receive it. So we're not trying, we want them to feel safe when they're doing it. And then I think that's something that also extends to our reporting. We often think about who will or will not be harmed in the production of our content. And we specifically try to maximize no harm, even if it's like a mayoral, you know, like a mayor, like an example I can give, and then as quickly as I can, is a mayor in one of the municipalities we cover was elected to state assembly. So he's now going to be in the state legislature. And he helped effectively position one of his other council people to take over and do that in what people might describe as an authoritarian way. He created a poll, effectively like a mock election, mock endorsement process within the local party. The ballot box that was used for this was taken out of the room several times. There was like a variety of allegations of sort of impropriety. And people were talking about this in this community, and it's pretty significant. So we decided to do something about it. And the first draft read like, he said, she said, this, that, drama, not a lot of utility. Like, if someone read this, they'd be like, politics, and that would be over. So what we did is we actually de-centered the core story, like this thing occurred and how scandalous is it? And that was our lead. That was like 2 graphs at the beginning of the story. But then the rest of the story was like, what do you need to know about party committees and how party systems work in New Jersey? Because people don't realize that there's like 12 to 25,000 elected officials between your town and your county across the state that effectively hold most of the power and determine who does and does not come up through local politics and what policies get passed, et cetera. So that's a place where we said, like, look, all it's going to do is harm our relationship with these stakeholders, even if they are people of power. Like, so what, and that allowed us to sort of pivot and say, okay, well, how do we serve people's needs and decenter the powerful in that specific issue?
It's really interesting. In the UK, I don't know if this is only us or not, but we call that Punch and Judy politics, when you have that really kind of like, he said, she said, it's all drama, it's all conflicts, they're all in it, you know, they're all as bad as each other. And people universally tell you they don't like it, they don't really understand it, they don't really, you know, what the hell. It's incredibly disengaging. So it's really interesting that also plays out in terms of your care in terms of how you cover stuff. And there were loads more hands up the first time. So here, where's the microphone? No, a bit more forward. Put your hand more up. Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Franziska. I'm editor-in-chief in a multilingual community radio in Luxembourg. And people have used our airwaves for 30 years to make shows and so on. One thing that we're constantly concerned about is how to get minorities more on the microphone, and also in these co-creational news stories, how to include minorities basically, and not always have only the white voices. Do you have any experiences, any strategies on this issue?
Great, thank you. And there was another one just a little bit further back. Yeah, gentleman there, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lars, and I chair an organization called the Sustainable Journalism Partnership. I'm curious to hear, we know that the ivory tower journalism that you described in the beginning, there's a lot of results in a lot of doom and gloom. And so you can also cut journalism and say that you have the doom and gloom journalism typical, and then on the other side you have solution-oriented journalism, or constructive journalism as we call it in Scandinavia. I'm from Sweden. So I'm just curious to hear, with this co-creative journalism, I hear a lot of kind of solution-oriented ideas. So I'm just curious to hear more about the connection between solution-oriented journalism and co-creative journalism.
Really interesting. Thank you, Lars. Was there anyone, I feel biased towards this side of the room. Is there anyone on this side of the room who had a hand up that I've missed? If not, no, fine. Was there anyone else on my favourite right side of the room with a hand up that I've missed? Okay, great. So we've got two questions then. I don't know, Simon, shall I start with you this time?
I can do my best. I think Lars, your question. I think 100% solutions journalism is a framing we use. We think of ourselves as not just the reporting we're doing as highlighting solutions, but the role the Jersey Bee can play in being a solution to some of these problems that our community faces. So I like the constructive journalism framing. We think the framing we use is reparative, like reparation, repair. That's a movement in the United States for reparations for descendants of enslaved people. And then we think about the role we play in that. That is the ultimate repair for this country, right? There's a lot of things need to occur for us to get there. And we think about day to day, what is the information people need to get involved in their community, build connections, and build a platform for repair. And then our journalism is about highlighting the repair, the skills you need, the tools you need to get, to help us, again, leaning on the audience for the impact. They're the ones that are going to do something with the information. So what do they need to know to do the thing we want to accomplish together? And then to the first question on bringing more diverse sources into your storytelling or maybe into production is I think you just have to ask those people what they need or want and then just do it. You have to just be willing to be in collaboration and understanding about gaps in participation. Likely, it might look like trainings. It might look like stipends, where some I don't know what your organization, how your organization functions, but stipended opportunities, paid opportunities to produce stuff or learn things. Direct relationships with organizations that represent those communities. So we partner with a variety of cultural organizations to produce our programming. And again, our core newsletter strategy allows us to then curate that content as well. So we're giving all the time before we take. And I think that's going to be a question also for your organizations. Like, have we been taking from this community a lot? Like, we're going to have to do a lot of giving before maybe they do show up in the broadcast room to participate.
I like that framing of giving before we take. Another, just my own personal view on that is that it's very difficult if it is a group of privileged white people trying to invite a group of less privileged people in. It only really works when the leadership itself is diverse or minority or global majority led. Otherwise, I think there's always an inherent sort of more taking than giving risk. Eliz.
Yeah, I would really second everything that Simon just said, and I would add that it's a really long-term project. So I think that, firstly, at multiple levels, it's really important. So the Bristol Cable was, very specifically hired people onto staff and also onto our board on purpose and at a higher ratio as well. It wasn't just, 10% of people of colour in Bristol, therefore 10% of our staff and our board will be people of colour. It was those people will need to be overrepresented because historically they have been underrepresented at the cable, and therefore we need to do better than just kind of fulfilling a quota and then maintaining that over time. So that's written into our strategy, that is something that we are doing. So I think that's really important as well. It's not just sort of going, oh, we met the quota now, that's good. Diversity, check. I think that is something that we will continue to need to, work at and maintain.
Natalia, we are almost out of time, I think. So I think I'm going to give you the last few words.
Okay, so about minorities, so when we were doing the first one about COVID, we really wanted to reach to communities in the favelas and communities in different parts of Brazil. So we mapped out social movements and social organizations, like this was like a strategy. And then we reached out to their leaders who already consume our content and said, can you help us spreading the link? And then the link led to a very, very simple questionnaire, like 3 pages, thought for this public as well. And also we started receiving, this is very common in Brazil, audio messages on WhatsApp. So we said, if you don't want to write, just send them audio messages. So we're just getting audio messages with people reporting. So we mapped out and we reached out to people who can reach out to these communities specifically. And then I wanted to talk about doom and gloom versus solutions. And I think I felt in this entire conference 2 things. First, there is a whole talk about, oh, we're no longer journalists, we're content creators, which really pisses me off, which is complete bullshit. We have to defend journalism. And also, all journalism is doom and gloom, and then we should just talk about solutions, which is also crap. Because sometimes understanding the issue is a solution. So I've done so many times that I was reporting on something that the people themselves had not realized what they are going through. So I gave you the example, these people who were going, a mass of people being thrown in the hands of the militias, and they started to being surveilled. They didn't know. So when we were there talking to them, and they said, and like people were looking up at us, like looking angry, and they're like, oh yeah, these are the owners of the building, we're sorry, we don't know if we can give this interview. Like they didn't even know. So just helping them understand their condition is already a solution. And I think journalism has this value, and I want to go back to why Brazil, something like, you look at Google and you look at Facebook, and they are spreading the narrative that journalism has no value. But if you want to understand that journalism has a value, look at Latin America. There is dozens, thousands of media that started out as independent, managed to find a community that supports them. And nowadays, just in the last month in Brazil, Agencia Publica is 14 years. There's another 3 media that just turned 10. Do they have a sustainable model? Not at all. It's not sustainable, but here we are. The only reason we are here is because communities understand that there's value and help us in times of crisis by shifting the model or whatever. But this proves that even though the legacy media has a crisis in its model, that journalism has value. And it's not only with one thing, not only with co-creation, not only with solutions, but it's like, it's there. People want us to exist. And I think this is the response to the crisis we're having. There is value in what we do.
I think so. I think I have to just say one final point before we go is another evidence of the value of journalism is that 200 journalists have been killed in Gaza over the last year, which makes it now almost impossible to report about what is happening in Gaza. Anyone would like to pay tribute to those journalists, I think there was going to be a vigil on the steps of the fountain or the cathedral in 10 minutes' time at 6 o'clock. So some of us will be walking up there after the session. Simon, I'm sorry you can't join us, but I guess you'll be there in spirit. But look, thank you all very much for coming, for co-creating a really productive session. And Eliz, Natalia and Simon, thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you.